A power-tripping gate agent at JFK thought she was just putting an unassuming black family in their place by tearing up their first-class tickets. She didn't know the father in the faded hoodie didn't just buy the seats he had just bought the entire airline. Here's exactly how her career ended. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was thick with the usual midsummer tension. Hundreds of passengers swarmed the concourse, dragging wheeled suitcases over the speckled terrazzo floors, the scent of expensive duty-free perfume, fighting a losing battle against the smell of stale coffee and jet fuel. At Gate B-22, the massive Boeing 777-300ER was being prepped for Flight 418, a direct red-eye to Paris Charles de Gaulle. For David Hayes, this was supposed to be a celebratory trip. Just 48 hours prior, David's private equity firm, Hayes Capital Group, had finalized a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, purchasing a 68% controlling stake in Trans Global Airways. David was a self-made billionaire, a quiet titan in the logistics and aviation tech sectors. But looking at him, you would never know it. At 42, David despised the stiff, suffocating suits of Wall Street. For an 8-hour transatlantic flight, he wore his standard travel uniform, a plain, faded grey pullover hoodie, comfortable navy joggers, and a pair of well-worn running shoes. His wife Sarah was similarly dressed in a loose cashmere sweater and leggings, holding the hands of their 2 children, 10-year-old Leo and 7-year-old Maya. When the overhead PA system crackled to life, the sharp, authoritative voice of the senior gate agent echoed across the waiting area. "Good evening, passengers. Transglobal Airways. Flight 418 to Paris is now beginning the boarding process. At this time, we invite our first-class passengers, as well as our Diamond Elite Medallion members, to approach the priority lane." David smiled at his wife, slung his battered leather duffel over his shoulder, and led his family toward the blue-carpeted priority boarding lane. Standing behind the podium was Cynthia Higgins. Cynthia had been a gate agent for Transglobal for 15 years, a tenure that had calcified her into a rigid, bitter enforcer of airport hierarchy. She wore her navy blue uniform like a police captain's badge, her blonde hair sprayed into an immovable helmet, her lips painted a severe shade of crimson. Over the years, Cynthia had developed a sixth sense, or so she bragged to her co-workers in the break room, for spotting people who didn't belong in first class. To her wealth had a specific look. It looked like tailored suits designer luggage, and almost exclusively it looked white. As David and his family approached the empty priority lane, Cynthia's eyes narrowed. She took in David's faded hoodie, the children's excited chatter, and Sarah's unbranded tote bag. Before David could even reach the scanner, Cynthia stepped out from behind the podium, physically blocking their path, with her arm outstretched like a crossing guard. "Excuse me," Cynthia said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet, patronizing tone. "I think you folks missed the announcement. This lane is for first class and Diamond Elite members only. Main cabin and basic economy boarding won't begin for another 45 minutes. You need to step back and wait until your group is called." David stopped momentarily, taken aback by the sheer abruptness of the wall she had thrown up. He offered a polite, accommodating smile, assuming it was a simple misunderstanding. "We are in first class," David said calmly, reaching into his pocket to retrieve his phone, which displayed the 4 digital boarding passes. Cynthia didn't move. She didn't even look at his phone. Instead, she let out a short, breathy chuckle that was entirely devoid of humor. "Sir, I need you to step out of the lane. We have actual priority passengers waiting to board." Behind David, a tall, red-faced businessman in a sharp grey suit huffed loudly, checking his Rolex. "Some people," the man muttered just loud enough to be heard. "I have our boarding passes right here." David repeated his voice, dropping slightly in register losing its casual warmth. He stepped forward and held the phone directly over the optical scanner. Beep. The machine flashed a bright, validating green light. The screen clearly displayed Hayes/David. Seat 1A, first class. For a fraction of a second, a flash of genuine surprise crossed Cynthia's heavily powdered face, but it was immediately replaced by a hardening of her jaw. Her pride refused to let her admit she was wrong. Instead of stepping aside, she reached over and slammed her palm down on a red button on her console, manually overriding the gate system and turning the scanner light from green to a harsh, flashing red. "System error," Cynthia announced loudly, ensuring the growing line of wealthy passengers behind them could hear. "It beeped green," Sarah pointed out, stepping up beside her husband, her maternal instincts flaring as she noticed Leo looking nervously between his parents and the angry agent. "The passes are valid." "Ma'am, I am the senior gate agent here, and I am telling you there is an irregularity with your tickets." Cynthia snapped, her customer service facade completely dissolving into outright hostility. "I need you to take your family and step out of the boarding area immediately so I can process these legitimate passengers. Stand over by the wall." David looked at Cynthia. He recognized the look in her eyes. It was a look he hadn't seen directed at him since he was a young, broke college student trying to navigate the world. It was the look of raw, unfiltered prejudice. She wasn't questioning the computer. She was questioning them. "We will step to the side," David said, his voice eerily calm. "But I expect you to resolve this irregularity right now." Cynthia sneered. "Stand by the wall. I'll deal with you when I have time." David guided Sarah and the kids a few feet away, leaning against the cold glass of the terminal window, overlooking the tarmac. For the next 15 minutes they stood in silence as Cynthia warmly welcomed passenger after passenger through the priority lane. She smiled brightly at the red-faced businessman, wishing him a wonderful flight, despite him practically shoving past Maya. Every time David tried to approach the desk, Cynthia would hold up a single finger, not looking up from her screen. "Wait your turn, sir." Finally, the first-class line emptied. David walked back to the podium, his face an unreadable mask. "All right, the line is clear. What seems to be the issue with our tickets?" Cynthia sighed dramatically, typing aggressively on her keyboard with long acrylic nails. She squinted at the monitor. These tickets were booked just 3 days ago. 4 international first-class tickets. That's a nearly $40,000 transaction, booked at the absolute last minute. "And?" David asked. "And?" Cynthia said, leaning forward over the counter, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "They were booked using an Amex Centurion corporate card. Given the suddenness of the booking and the profile of the transaction, our fraud prevention algorithms require manual verification. Credit card theft is a serious issue in this terminal, Mr. Hayes." Sarah gasped. "Are you accusing us of stealing a credit card?" "I am simply following trans-global security protocols, ma'am," Cynthia replied, crossing her arms defensively. "I need to see the physical credit card used to make this purchase. I also need to see all 4 passports. And because you're traveling with minors, I'm going to need to see their birth certificates to prove they belong to you." David stared at her. "Birth certificates?" "We are flying to Paris. Our passports are federal identification. You do not require birth certificates for international travel with passports. Furthermore, I booked these tickets through a corporate travel portal. The physical card is in a safe in a corporate office in Manhattan. The digital passes are all that is required by your own airline's policy. Without the physical card, I cannot verify you didn't just steal a corporate account number online," Cynthia said, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She had him. She knew nobody carried the physical corporate card for massive company accounts. She had trapped him in a bureaucratic dead end entirely of her own making. "You're doing this on purpose," Sarah said, her voice shaking with suppressed anger. "You took one look at us and decided we didn't belong. Ma'am, if you're going to raise your voice and become aggressive, I will have to call Port Authority," Cynthia warned, her hand hovering over the desk phone. "Call them," David said. The words cut through the air like a whip. Cynthia blinked, startled by his total lack of fear. Usually the threat of airport security made problematic passengers back down. "Excuse me, call Port Authority," David repeated, leaning his weight casually against the podium. "In fact, call your shift manager too, because we are getting on this plane." Cynthia's face flushed an ugly shade of magenta. "You're not getting on anything except a subway back to wherever you came from." She snatched up the phone and dialed a 3-digit extension. "Greg, it's Cynthia at B22. I need you down here immediately. I also need Port Authority police. I have a hostile passenger attempting to board with a flagged corporate account. He's refusing to provide documentation and is acting aggressively toward staff." She slammed the phone down. "They're on their way. If I were you, I'd leave before you leave in handcuffs." Within 3 minutes, the situation escalated into a public spectacle. 2 armed Port Authority police officers approached the gate, flanked by Greg Harmon, the Terminal 4 shift manager for Trans Global. Greg was a tired-looking man, in a rumpled suit, clearly annoyed to be dragged out of his office. The remaining passengers waiting to board main cabin were now watching the drama unfold, whispering among themselves. Some pulled out their phones, ready to record. Leo pressed his face into Sarah's side, crying softly. Maya was gripping her father's pant leg. "What's the situation, Cynthia?" Greg asked, eyeing David and his family with immediate suspicion. "This man," Cynthia pointed an accusing finger at David, "is trying to board first class using 4 tickets flagged for corporate card fraud. He refuses to show the physical card and became verbally abusive when I asked for proper identification for his children." One of the police officers rested his hand on his tactical belt, stepping closer to David. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the counter and hand over your ID." David didn't raise his voice. He didn't make sudden movements. He slowly reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed his New York State driver's license to the officer. "Officer, there has been no verbal abuse. There is no fraud," David said evenly. "This agent bypassed a valid green scan on our boarding passes because she didn't like the way we looked. She is violating Trans Global's boarding policies." Greg, the manager, sighed and looked at Cynthia's screen. "Cynthia, the system says the tickets are cleared. It's a verified corporate account." "It's a flagged anomaly, Greg," Cynthia hissed. "Look at them. Do they look like Centurion card holders to you? Do they look like they belong in our first-class cabin? He probably hacked a corporate account." Greg hesitated. He knew Cynthia was overstepping, but she was a union rep and a headache to deal with. It was easier to back the employee than deal with the paperwork of a grievance. "So," Greg said, turning to David with a tight, apologetic grimace that meant he was about to do the wrong thing. "Given the irregularity, and to ensure the safety and security of our flight, I'm going to have to ask you to forfeit your seats tonight. We can rebook you tomorrow morning once we verify the payment with the corporate office." "I am not flying tomorrow," David said. "I am flying tonight. On my plane." Cynthia let out a loud theatrical bark of laughter. "Your plane? Oh my God, Greg, he's delusional. Cancel their tickets. Cancel them right now." David ignored her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I gave you a chance, Cynthia. I really did." He unlocked his screen, tapped his contacts, and pressed dial on a number saved simply as T. Albright. As the phone rang, Cynthia crossed her arms, a look of utter victory on her face. "Who are you calling your lawyer? Go ahead. They can't help you here." "No," David said softly as the call connected. "I'm calling your boss." The phone line rang twice before a crisp, authoritative voice answered. "Thomas Albright speaking." Thomas Albright was not just a name in a directory. He was the outgoing Chief Executive Officer of Trans Global Airways, a man whose reputation in the aviation industry was legendary. And as of 48 hours ago, he answered directly to David Hayes, the new majority shareholder and chairman of the board. "Thomas, it's David Hayes." David said, his voice calm, cutting through the ambient noise of Terminal 4. He kept his eyes locked on Cynthia, who was practically vibrating with a mix of rage and smug disbelief. "David, good evening," Thomas replied warmly, the sound of papers shuffling in the background. "I thought you'd be halfway across the Atlantic by now. How is the new first-class product holding up?" "I wouldn't know, Thomas. I'm currently standing at Gate B22 at JFK, and your senior gate agent has not only denied my family boarding, but has also flagged our corporate account for fraud, accused us of stealing, demanded my children's birth certificates, and called the Port Authority police to have us removed." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, save for a sharp intake of breath. When Thomas spoke again, the warmth was entirely gone. His voice was a sub-zero whisper. "She did what? She overrode a valid green scan because she didn't like the way I was dressed, Thomas," David stated, ensuring the surrounding passengers, many of whom had their phones out, recording the altercation, could hear the facts clearly. "Your shift manager, a man named Greg, is standing right here, backing her up." "David, I am so incredibly sorry," Thomas said, the panic now palpable in the executive's voice. "Do not move. Hand the phone to the shift manager. Right now." David pulled the phone from his ear and held it out toward Greg. "He wants to speak with you." Greg frowned, looking between the phone and David. He had expected the man to call some low-level customer service hotline or a stressed-out corporate travel agent. He reached out hesitantly and took the phone. "This is Greg Harmon, Terminal 4 shift manager. Who am I speaking with?" Even from 3 feet away, David and Sarah could hear Thomas Albright's voice booming through the phone's earpiece. "Greg Harmon, this is Thomas Albright, CEO of Trans Global Airways. You will listen to me very carefully, and you will not interrupt. The man standing in front of you is David Hayes. 2 days ago, his equity firm purchased a controlling stake in this airline. He is your boss. He is my boss. And you and your gate agent are currently subjecting him to what sounds like a catastrophic, racially motivated humiliation in the middle of our flagship terminal." All the color instantly drained from Greg's face. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a ledge and was waiting to hit the ground. His mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land, but no sound came out. The rumpled suit he wore suddenly seemed 3 sizes too big. "Mr. Albright, I had no idea." Greg stammered, his hands shaking so violently that he nearly dropped David's phone. "The system. Cynthia said there was an anomaly." "I don't care what Cynthia said," Thomas roared over the line. "I am dispatching Richard Bancroft, the Vice President of JFK Operations, to your gate right now. He was in the terminal dealing with a customs issue. Until he arrives, you are to stand down. You will not touch Mr. Hayes's reservation. If that plane pushes back from the gate without the Hayes family in first class, I will personally see to it that you never work in commercial aviation again. Do you understand me, Harmon?" "Yes, sir. Yes, absolutely, Mr. Albright," Greg whispered, handing the phone back to David, as if it were a live grenade. Greg slowly turned his head to look at Cynthia. His eyes were wide with a terror that she simply couldn't comprehend. "Greg," Cynthia asked, her confident smirk finally faltering. "Who was that? Was it a prank? Tell the officers to escort him out so we can finish boarding." "Cynthia, shut up," Greg said, his voice trembling. "Just shut up and step away from the keyboard." Cynthia's jaw dropped. In 15 years, no manager had ever spoken to her that way. "Excuse me, I am the union representative for this gate, Greg. You cannot speak to me." "I said step away from the terminal," Greg shouted, finally finding his voice. He practically shoved past the two Port Authority officers, who were now exchanging deeply confused and concerned glances. The officers wisely stepped back, taking their hands off their duty belts, realizing that the power dynamic in the room had just violently inverted. But Cynthia's pride was a toxic, unyielding thing. Instead of stepping back, she lunged toward her keyboard. "I don't know what kind of scam this is, but I am cancelling these tickets right now. I'm offloading them from the manifest." She furiously typed her credentials and hit the command to scrub the Hayes family from Flight 418. The computer emitted a loud, harsh buzz. A bright red error message flashed across the screen. "Access denied. Executive override initiated." Cynthia stared at the screen, her acrylic nails hovering over the keys. "What? No. No, that's impossible. Only corporate can initiate an executive override." "They just did," David said smoothly. He knelt down to his son, who was still clutching Sarah's leg. David smiled warmly, brushing a tear from Leo's cheek. "It's okay, buddy. We're getting on the plane in just a minute. The lady made a mistake, but her bosses are coming to fix it." "You're bluffing," Cynthia hissed at David, though a bead of sweat had finally broken through her thick layer of foundation, sliding down her temple. "You probably have a friend in IT who hacked the system." Before David could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance of Concourse B. Pushing through the crowd of gaping passengers was Richard Bancroft, the VP of JFK Operations. Richard was a towering, silver-haired executive who usually moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a man in power. Right now, he was sprinting. He was flanked by two senior airport security directors in high-visibility vests. Richard burst through the perimeter of the priority lane, breathing heavily, his tie flying over his shoulder. He took one look at the scene, the armed police, the crying child, the smug agent, and the calm billionaire, and looked as if he might be physically ill. "Mr. Hayes." Richard Bancroft gasped, practically sliding to a halt in front of David. He extended a trembling hand. "Richard Bancroft, 5P of Operations. Words cannot express the profound apologies of Trans-Global Airways. Mr. Albright briefed me on the way over. This is entirely unacceptable." The crowd of passengers waiting to board let out a collective gasp. The red-faced businessman in the sharp grey suit, who had been huffing and rolling his eyes at David 15 minutes earlier, suddenly went very still, trying to shrink behind his carry-on luggage. Cynthia gripped the edge of her podium. Her knuckles were white. "Mr. Bancroft, sir. I don't know what lies this man is telling you, but he attempted to use a flagged Centurion card, and he became combative when I asked for verification. I was following protocol to protect the airline." Richard turned slowly to face Cynthia. The look of deference he had just shown David vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated executive fury. "Protocol?" Richard asked, his voice deceptively quiet. "You asked a first-class passenger for his children's birth certificates on a passport-verified international flight. You overrode a green optical scan. You called armed police on a family standing quietly by the window." "He didn't look right," Cynthia blurted out, the racist undertone of her actions finally stripping itself of its bureaucratic disguise. "Look at him. He's wearing sweatpants. People like him don't fly first class unless they stole the ticket. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over gate B22. Even Greg closed his eyes, groaning quietly. She had said the quiet part out loud, right in front of the man who owned the company, in front of the police, and in front of 50 cell phone cameras. People like him, Richard repeated, stepping directly into Cynthia's personal space. Cynthia, people like him is David Hayes. As of this week, Hayes Capital Group owns 68% of this airline. He doesn't just fly first class. He owns the plane you're standing in front of. He owns the desk you're hiding behind. He signs your paychecks. Cynthia's eyes darted frantically from Richard to David, and then down to the floor. The reality of the situation crashed into her like a physical blow. The absolute certainty of her prejudice had completely blinded her, and now the ground was falling out from beneath her. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. She looked at Greg for help, but the shift manager had turned his back to her, terrified of being caught in her blast radius. "Cynthia Higgins!" Richard continued his voice, ringing out clearly across the gate. "Effective immediately, your employment with Trans Global Airways is terminated for gross misconduct and blatant violation of our anti-discrimination policies." "You can't do that!" Cynthia shrieked, panic finally replacing her anger. "I'm union. You have to go through the grievance board. I demand my rep. I have already spoken with your union president on my walk over here." Richard fired back seamlessly. A verbal confirmation of racial profiling, caught on airport surveillance, and 50 smartphones voids your union protection under the zero-tolerance clause of your contract. You are fired. Now hand me your SIDA badge. You are no longer authorized to be in a secure area of this airport. Cynthia began to hyperventilate. Tears ruined her carefully applied makeup. Please, I have 15 years of seniority. I need this job, my pension." She looked at David, her eyes pleading. The patronizing gate agent was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, broken woman. "Mr. Hayes, please. I made a mistake. I was just stressed. It's been a long shift." David looked at her without an ounce of pity. He thought about how she had looked at his wife. He thought about the fear he had seen in his son's eyes when the police showed up. "You weren't stressed, Cynthia. You were cruel," David said quietly. "You weaponized your tiny bit of authority to make my family feel small because of the color of our skin. If you do this to me, I can only imagine how many hard-working people you've harassed and bullied over your 15 years here. Hand over your badge." Trembling, Cynthia reached up and unclipped the blue Trans Global lanyard from her neck. She dropped it onto the counter. "Officers," Richard Bancroft said, turning to the Port Authority police. "This woman is no longer an employee. Please escort her out of the terminal and ensure she leaves airport property." The officers, eager to make up for their earlier involvement, stepped forward quickly. "Let's go, Mum. Keep moving," one officer said firmly, gesturing toward the exit concourse. As Cynthia was led away sobbing quietly, the entire gate area erupted into spontaneous applause. Passengers cheered, clapping for the swift and brutal delivery of karma. Richard turned to Greg Harmon. "Greg, you are suspended without pay, pending a full HR review of your failure to manage this situation. Leave the desk. I will board this flight myself." Greg nodded miserably, gathering his coat and walking away without a word. Richard stepped behind the podium and reset the system. He looked up at David, offering a genuine, deeply embarrassed smile. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes, on behalf of the entire company, I am so sorry for the delay. Your aircraft is ready. Please let me escort you down the jet bridge." David nodded, taking Sarah's hand. "Thank you, Richard." As the Hayes family walked down the priority lane, the red-faced businessman who had complained earlier practically pressed himself flat against the glass wall to get out of their way, refusing to make eye contact. They walked down the jet bridge and stepped onto the massive Boeing 777. The entire flight crew was waiting at the door. The captain, a veteran pilot with 4 stripes on his shoulder, stepped out of the cockpit to personally shake David's hand. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Hayes. We are honored to have you flying with us tonight," the captain said warmly. "Thank you, Captain," David replied. "Let's get these people to Paris." 10 minutes later, the family was settled into their private lie-flat suites in the first-class cabin. Maya was already watching a cartoon on her massive screen, and Leo was drinking a glass of sparkling apple cider. Sarah leaned over the center divider and squeezed David's hand. "Well," Sarah smiled, raising an eyebrow, "that was certainly one way to evaluate the customer service of your new investment." David chuckled softly, leaning back into his plush leather seat as the massive jet engines roared to life, pushing the plane away from the gate. "I think," David said, looking out the window at the receding lights of Terminal 4, "we're going to be making a few structural changes." Did Cynthia get exactly what she deserved tonight? Sometimes hard karma doesn't just knock, it kicks the door down. If you loved seeing this power-tripping agent face the ultimate reality check, hit that like button right now. Share this video with friends who need a good karma payout today, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable real-life drama stories every single week. See you soon.